Gestalt therapy dream work, theories and techniques. This technique does not involve the therapist interpreting or analyzing the dream. Rather, it is the client in bringing the dream to life as if it were happening now with the client as part of the dream. The client details the dream with each entity, event, and mood. And then, because each part or part that's selected, and the client acts each as fully as he or she can engage in dialogue with the part. The dream is assumed to be a projection with individual parts as the individual owns contradictory and inconsistent elements. And again, each allows for unfinished business to be addressed and resolved. Gestalt therapy empty chair. The client addresses an empty chair as if another person, typically someone significant to them, or aspect of themselves, for example, feeling, personality element, were present. A role playing format ensues, allowing exploration of the self. The client may assume more than one role and may move back and forth between chairs depending on the issue, situation, and context. Gestalt therapy exaggerating a behavior. When using this technique, the counselor will have the client exaggerate specific movements to aid in understanding feelings. For example, if the client is talking about his teenage son, have him move like he does, which will intensify the client's awareness and feelings about his son. Gestalt therapy fantasy approaches. The therapist will walk the client through a guided imagery of a triggering event and encourage the client to share what is felt in the moment, increasing awareness of feelings through the triggering event. Gestalt therapy game of dialogue. This is a technique in which the therapist joins with the client in a discussion, not by controlling the discussion, but by participating in the same manner as the client, consistent um, with phenomenological philosophy. The goal is to be fully present, commit to the dialogue, and to live the dialogue, such as in psychodrama, making the experience come alive with emotion, thoughts, beliefs, and anything the client may bring internally to the encounter as if it were real. Gestalt therapy internal dialogue exercise. This is a technique in which the therapist joins with the client in a discussion, not by controlling the discussion, but by participating in the same manner as the client, consistent consistent with phenomenological philosophy. The goal is to be fully present, commit to the dialogue, and to live the dialogue such as in psychodrama, making the experience come alive with emotion, thoughts, beliefs, and anything the client might bring internally to the encounter as if it were real. Gestalt therapy making the rounds. This exercise assists the client in learning confrontation skills, taking risks and self-disclosure, and the client either engages with a group of people or it may be done in a format therapy group. And the client is to speak with each member or do something with each member, such as ask about weekend plans, give a compliment, or ask for the time. We stop therapy playing the production. The therapist will ask the client to play the role of the individual when they are not connecting. This can be done with the dialogue, improv drama, or any creative medium to assist in dropping dependence and allowing the client to connect with the here and now experience. Thought therapy rehearsal exercise. The client will rehearse out loud with the therapist a specific task or dialogue. The client provides direction, and the work in the moment allows for mastery and building of confidence, eliminating the past feelings brought to present, thus allowing the future to unfold as the client desires. Gestalt therapy reversal technique. When using this technique, the therapist will ask the client to do the opposite of his or her behavior, acting out a scenario in the opposite to gain insight and understanding in the here and now. Humanistic therapy checks feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations behind their story. Ask the client to describe what he or she is feeling as he or she describes something, or conversely, what the client is thinking as he or she is feeling something. Having the client check for sensation in his or her body may be helpful to remain in the present, fully aware. For example, the client may say he or she is feeling tension in the shoulders as he or she describes mental issues at this point. The therapist may say, allow yourself to breathe into the feeling in your shoulders and open up whatever associations come up and share what emerges. Humanistic therapy. Emphasis on intention and or resistance. Emphasis on intention and or resistance. With most client actions, you can focus attention on the intention or resistance toward wholeness or both depending on the situation and the current status of the therapeutic relationship. For example, if the client focuses on music exciting, the therapist can focus on how that keeps them from engaging in more productive pursuits and in living a more independent life. On the contrary, the therapist puts focus upon the client tenaciously focusing on his health concerns and explore what would happen if he used that same intensity and strength in more productive ways. The therapist could ask about how he would be and what his life would look like if he experiences his own tenacity and strength, and if he can describe his tenacity and strength. Humanistic therapy emphasis on functionality. The therapist maintains a client-centered approach and forges a connection along a human journey together. Empowering the client through mutuality. This is approach to hierarchical relationship in which the client is evaluated, has treatment prescribed, and is considered successful in the treatment as follows. Humanistic therapy emphasis on transparency and authenticity. The therapist is real and exists as a person in session, is open, honest, direct, and clear within the context of the therapeutic relationship and in line with the client's goals. For example, the therapist may share appreciation for the client's strengths and encourage display with difficult feelings or share the experience of feeling detached from the client, as though not making a strong contact or connecting on the issue at hand. Humanistic therapy engages curiosity. The therapist engages genuine curiosity to draw the client out, encouraging the client to describe experiences of various life facets, such as employment, relationships, or hobbies. The therapist may wonder about what the client likes, does not like, how the client keeps moving forward, or what is held back in communication with the relationship. Humanistic therapy, everything is everything. Assume coincidence does not exist, and what occurs in session is not an isolated one-time event, but instead the client's way of being. For example, if the client confuses appointment time, the therapist can assume this is a behavior that occurs in other relationships and explore this as an appropriate time. The therapist and client can explore thoughts and feelings about the way of being, the meaning made from it, or if change is desired. Start a deeper discussion on how the client conducts life in Jungian therapy, active imagination. One identifies an entity, for example, shadow figure, anima, maternal figure, now through a dream or other scene, and activates attention to the figure through meditation. The client is invited to enter the scene and dialogue with the entity, usually one that has qualities opposite the ego, thereby assessing rejected elements and availing them to the conscious mind. This may be done in writing, art, sculpting, dance, or other mediums. With this theory, Jungian therapy analysis of transference. With this theory, four stages are addressed, including one, the client's personal history projections onto the therapist. Two, the client differentiates his or her own consciousness from the collective. Three, the therapist's reality is differentiated from the superimposed images. Four, the achievement of greater knowledge and insight within the self, having worked through the transference and into an authentic relationship with the therapist. Jungian therapy dream analysis. This theory believes that images are a reflection of something within the person, and that the dream world can allow the individual access to the unconscious within the self specific to the dreamer. Jungian therapy individuation. This process involves the development of the individual's personality via making conscious the individual's unconscious and the collective unconscious indices. It is considered to be both a goal and something to develop throughout the lifespan. Jungian therapy journaling. This technique allows the client to keep track of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors so they can see their progress during therapy. Jungian therapy rituals. This technique involves a series of actions involving the entire family and a sequence of steps, forming a play that is to be enacted under specific circumstances. An example of a ritual is a family sitting together daily, each getting equal time to speak well of the family, with no negative opinions allowed. Jungian therapy sand play. This technique involves the use of a tray of sand for free expression, often used with the figures, symbols, avatars, or other miniature objects. This engages both children and adults in free expression and has been used successfully in a variety of trauma work. Jungian therapy shadow work. This technique addresses the qualities that do not fit our image of ourselves. Anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, lust, and shame. It also addresses behaviors that are not culturally acceptable, such as aggression, addiction, and dependency. This goal is to integrate parts of ourselves that we try to hide from. Narrative therapy deconstruct the problem. Using this technique, the therapist will assist the client in making the problem specific and manageable. For example, if the client reports, "My wife henpecks me and I am angry," then there is no clear solution and the client's emotional needs are not certain. The therapist helps the client to be more specific. "When my wife gives me a list of things that have to be done when I walk through the door, I feel unimportant as a husband, like I am only a handyman who hasn't just worked 10 hours to make our family bills meet." And the therapist could offer, "So you want your spouse to empathize with the stress you're bringing home from working all day, recognizing you as a person to give you a break." Narrative therapy deconstruction. This technique helps others understand what the problem means to the client. For example, the therapist might say, "Tell us what you see when the problem is present and what we will see when it goes away." Narrative therapy externalization technique. The client is asked to add a preposition to the behavior or characteristic he or she desires to change. For example, instead of "I am anxious," the client is encouraged to say, "I am currently living with anxiety," which is followed by the therapist asking, "When did you discover anxiety first entering your life?" Narrative therapy letters, definitional ceremonies, reflection. Encouragement is needed by people in the larger community system to validate the new positive storyline. Family members, the therapist, a support group, and trusted others can listen and speak openly or write to the client about their perspective of how they view the new narrative coming and being alive in the client's life. Narrative therapy, narration of a new story. Once the problem is deconstructed and unique outcomes are realized, It is important that new solutions are identified and integrated as the individual or family moves forward. The client or client system needs a new positive storyline in place that replaces the initial one presented when the client or client system enters treatment. The therapist in narrative therapy, unique outcomes altering the dominant negative story. The therapist assists the client to focus on a life story that is divergent from the problem saturated story narrative. For example, the client's dominant story is about marital issues, and the therapist says, "Tell me about a time when today's issues did not impact your marriage. Like, how did you fall in love?" Person centered therapy, active listening. When a client makes a statement, rephrase it back. This can be done verbatim to ask for additional information or clarify the emotional state. For example, Joan says, "I had an argument with my mom and we haven't spoken in 2 weeks." The therapist replies, "You had an argument and you guys are not talking?" Joan says, "Yes, we fought because I want her to come to my house for Thanksgiving, but she says it's just much better at her house because it had always been there. I was angry when it happened, but now I feel almost sad because things are changing for her since Dad died." The therapist says, "You were arguing about how to spend the time together as a family, but now with some thought about what the holiday has always meant to your mom, you feel sad." Person centered therapy congruence. The therapist acts as a role model for the client and models the human struggle toward greater realness and the space in which the real self and the ideal self are the same. Person centered therapy empathy. The therapist engages the client by understanding and sharing the feelings of the client expressed through body language, eye contact, and general sensitivity. Person-centered therapy reflects the feeling, paraphrasing nonverbals. With this technique, the therapist moves from the content of what the client is saying and focuses on underlying feeling in the client's message without judgment. For example, Ryan says, "My roommate is always late with his part of the rent. Never thinks of acting himself and thinks he can just be possible without replacing anything. What a pit." The therapist responds, "You should exasperate because he does not respect your boundaries or take his responsibilities seriously." Person-centered therapy, unconditional positive regard. The therapist accepts the client without judgment. The therapeutic relationship is primary. To accomplish this task, the therapist must listen without interpreting. Listen actively and avoid giving advice. Play, therapy, art. Art is tied directly to the unconscious and brings out tangible symptoms of emotion to the surface and also allows the client to become more self-aware in a non-threatening medium. Traditional materials, crayons, paper, finger, paint, markers, paint, clay, Play-Doh, paste, glitter, um, glue, scissors, string, stickers may be used, or electronic media may be incorporated. Art may be used alone or with other techniques. Play therapy, clay. Play can be used as art or tied to other therapeutic goals, such as rolling it into a ball and smashing it, squeezing it through the fingers, or placing it in varying amounts to represent values of something, someone, or decision. Play therapy drama. Have the client draw who he or she would like to be, asking reflective questions about what is wrong, identifying behaviors that the person has that could assist in problem goals, then invite the client to engage in the behaviors. For example, young children may select superheroes and act as if they are the superhero. Variants may be having clients take on an unfamiliar role to change perspectives or practice a new behavior or act as themselves in a situation or as a symbolic character or family member. The client may be asked to play therapy music. The client may be asked to bring in music that's meaningful, listen to it with the therapist, talk about the thoughts and feelings generated, and discuss how cognitions and emotions impact and are impacted by the client's current circumstances. The client can also write a song. Play therapy puppets. These may be used by clients to reenact scenes, play out feelings, practice new behaviors, facilitate decision making, develop communication skills, decrease isolation, play out fantasies, adjust thoughts, and express strong emotions. Play therapy fan traits. Fan traits may be used where or drive when children are offered and nurtured in several categories to create a world or scene. Categories include symbolic objects, for example, treasure chests, wishing well, natural objects, for example, shells, bones, structures, for example, bridges, gates, vegetation, shrubs, trees, animals, wild domestic prehistoric, vehicles, land, space, war, people, fantasy, domestic military, and buildings, castles, schools, high rises. Sand play may or may not be directed. Play therapy posting. In a group, divide the members into two parts, one that will be the artist and one that will be the clay, and have the artist sculpt the clay, with ground rules of not touching the clay. Once the sculptures are completed, the leader can tour the exhibit of sculptures, listening to the creator share about the creation process and how it is significant. Then have the members change roles. This can also be done in family therapy over the sibling group to explore the impact of members on one another. Play therapy storytelling. Invite the client to record a make-believe show with the therapist as the guest of honor. Make an introduction of the client, noting important elements and content. Once complete, ask if there is a lesson or moral and whether any details are needed. And make positive comments, for example, powerful, exciting, unusual, captivating. Turn off the recording device and gather any additional information needed, i.e. symbols, important actors, themes, emotional reactions, then tell the therapist first or prepared. For example, the same character situation setting only revives to include resolution to conflict or adding important or behavioral changes. Play therapy visualization. Many uses are available to this technique with the purpose being to engage the imagination where there are no barriers to reality. Allow the client to offer his or her view of problems, consider strengths, or reconsider expectations about others. For example, a client may be invited to imagine that he or she is camping in the woods in any structure he or she likes. For example, a sleeping bag in the open air, hut tent, lodge tent, cabin, cave. When a terrible storm begins, the client is asked what happens to him or her and to draw a picture of themselves before, during, and after the storm is over. Psychoanalytic therapy analysis of resistance and defenses. Interpreting how the patient avoids or manages pain is key to psychoanalytic therapy, pointing out any behaviors the patient uses to resist exploring specific issues or therapy in general. For example, silence, lateness, reflecting, assists the patient in gaining insight about these issues. Psychoanalytic therapy, dream analysis, interpretation. This theory considers analysis of dreams to be the pathway to the unconscious. Examining dreams assists in discovering psychic contact, latent ideas for the repressed drives and emotions within within the unconscious mind. Psychoanalytic therapy through association. This method is emerge unless the client has resistance. However, resistance may be evidence there is important information requiring further probing. Psychoanalytic therapy transference. This naturally occurs when the client responds to the therapist as though he or she were someone significant in the client's past, for example, a parent. Working through the memories, attitudes, motives, perceptions, feelings, fantasies, or other issues in the here and now gives the client a new experience. Reality therapy confrontation. Because setting specific plans are a key element in this theory. When a client does not follow through or something, confrontation is not avoidable. The therapist cannot accept excuses, but works to be positive and may attempt to engage humor to address the issue. A question the therapist might ask is what impact will not taking that time on you. Reality therapy humor. Humor is spontaneous, idiosyncratic, and only occurs in the here and now. So it is a natural fit for reality therapy. Therapists can engage friendly involvement with their clients by laughing at themselves, modeling clients to do the same. Reality therapy metaphors. When the client speaks in metaphors, the therapist may choose to respond to the metaphor rather than the apparent content. Reality therapy paradox. Cautioning the client to not follow through or encouraging the opposite behavior may be indicated to lower resistance. If a client does not elect to follow through on the goal or intervention, the therapist might say, it seems we may have rushed that plan. You are not ready for that, but it is so, or it's that because we know other issues need to be addressed first. Reality therapy plans of action. This technique involves assisting a client in making a specific, attainable, beneficial, time-limited plan of action. The client must be clear on what he or she wants and what he or she is taking responsibility for before success can be attained. REV Bibliotherapy. The therapist assigns any number of self-help books that have specific issues being addressed to immerse the client in information and to aid in the client in re-education. REBT blow up technique. Have the client imagine the worst case scenario or what he or she fears occurring, then blow the event out of proportion until the client cannot help but find a new scenario. REBT catastrophize scale. This technique is used to address awfulizing. Having the client write a scale from 0% to 100% in 10% intervals, then ask the individual to rate whatever the issue is that they are catastrophizing about and insert it into the scale in the appropriate place. Afterwards, fill in the other levels with what the client believes is applicable to each level. For example, at 0% might be flipping tea the backyard. 20% is recording a sporting event instead of watching it live. 70% is being mugged. 90% is having a heart attack. And 100% is being sucked up into an F4 tornado. Have the client progressively alter their concerning items to fit into the perspective of the other items. REVT devil's advocate. The therapist adopts the client's belief and adamantly argues for the position while the client works to convince the therapist why the belief is dysfunctional. It is most useful when the client can see his or her position is irrational, but is struggling with understanding. REBT double standard dispute. When the client is self downing or holding a should statement about his or her own behavior. Ask whether the client would hold another person, for example, best friend, sister, to the same standard or or label for doing the same thing, or recommend that the client hold a demanding belief for that person. REBT exposure. Assist with coping skills, for example, breathing exercises, progressive relaxation, and positive self talk. Then have the client enter the fear